Kevin Levinson and Damien, and we'd like to welcome you to today's webinar about BEC and payment fraud, and how it is a two-sided problem for businesses. We'll be kicking off in a few minutes to let the people join that are a little bit later. In the meantime, you can familiarize yourself with the software that we're using. So we're using GoToWebinar software, and it has a nice question tab and a chat tab in there. So if you have any questions regarding the content today, you can submit them in the questions tab, and we'll deal with them at the end of the presentation. If there's anything technical, like your sound might cut out or anything like that, we'll address it straight away. So we have a few people here on the call that can help you with answering those questions. So yeah, we'll just see the numbers going up now. So we'll start in 2 minutes. In the meantime, if Gavin, can you like briefly introduce yourself, and for Damien after that as well, same thing.
Sure, thank you, Nick. I'm Gavin Levinson. I'm the Chief Growth Officer for eftsure, so responsible for our business development and how we go to market. Have been working with the company for several years, having joined as one of the early employees, and was drawn to the company because in my previous life as the CEO of some companies in the communication space, saw unfortunately the impact of at least 2 of the scams that Damien will be taking you through in the first part of this demo. So when I connected through some colleagues with eftsure and saw quite a unique solution to a very pervasive problem, I jumped at the chance to join. So lovely to be here with you this afternoon, and over to you, Damien.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name's Damien Grace. I'm the founder and executive director of Phriendly Phishing. Similar story, actually, you know, where this came from. After seeing the impact that phishing can have on an organization, not just on an organization, from a personal level as well, knowing family members that have been scammed out of considerable amounts of money, and also from my point of view, with a background in ethical hacking and seeing how easy it is to get into an organization using phishing emails, we saw that there was a massive issue there, and not enough was being done to address it. Hence why we started the Phriendly Phishing program.
Great.
Thank you. So I saw like Jill had some issues with her audio for now. If you have that issue as well, there is an audio tab, and sometimes you have to select the right hardware to get the audio straight. So yeah, I think there's enough people on the call now. We've given it plenty of time, and we want to make sure that we'll stay within the hour. So let's start. So for today, a little bit of context around payments and BEC threats, and how it endangers your business and when you are at risk. We're going to talk about the threats. Damien will present you with some examples of some BEC emails, and also see how easy it is to actually fall victim to these. And then specifically, we're going to focus on executive fraud. And Gavin will later also present a scenario of the Levitas Capital Fund, where this fraud led to where this scam led to a massive fraud. And then at the end, we'll provide you with some solutions that you can do in order to prevent falling victim. So today we really focus on like two places where your company is at risk, where your doors are open for this fraud. And then one is in the communication, and the other one is in payments. And when you look at these, this is where the areas where you are most vulnerable, and what is leading to fake billing scams and other frauds that are leading up to this. And then whether that's a big problem, it is a big problem to the sum of $128 million in 2020 reported by the ACCC in the Scam Watch report. So yeah, that's quite a massive problem. And when we see what is the origin of that problem, is this like it's a question about identity. So how do you know who's on the other side of the computer? In this, like, we're all digital, we're all remote. How do you know that an email actually comes from your coworker? How do you know that the supplier that asks you for a payment is actually the supplier that you paid? And their email could be compromised, or the bank account couldn't be the right one. So it's a part of identity, and Damien will take you through the part of where the vulnerabilities lie within communication, and then Gavin will talk more about where the problems are and the threats are within the payments. So on that note, Damien, I'll give you the presenter role.
Thank you. We're working now?
Yep.
Excellent. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day. I think what you're doing, the time that you're spending here is actually going to be really good for you. I think it's, from my experience, as I mentioned before, from a penetration perspective, a penetration testing perspective, phishing has become the #1 risk for most organizations these days. There's a lot of different types of phishing attacks out there, but from a cybersecurity perspective, phishing is really the #1 risk. It's the easiest way to get into an organization, bar none, and not to mention the cheapest way. And we're just seeing incredible increases in the prevalence of phishing year on year. You can see on the screen there some of the stats around how prevalent it is. You know, thousands of, someone's on, can you mute yourself, I think, Nick? Thousands of different BEC attacks, $128 million worth of impact there. BEC is also one of the top 5 reported scams from banking. The thing is, most of these scams aren't even reported. I'm sure every single one of you have received some sort of scam like this. You know, you probably know someone that has. If you haven't, as we talk through this today, I think you're going to recognize a lot of these. And so what we're seeing here is, I think, not even the tip of the iceberg in terms of the actual impact that these type of scams have. So I wanted to open up explaining a little bit around how the scams work. What is the risk? You know, a lot of people look at this and go, it's just an email. What is the risk that an email has? And at the outset, it seems quite logical to think that. So I wanted to run through the different components of an email and highlight the different areas of risk that is associated with each of those. The first one is around opening the email. I'm actually, all the time I'm asked by people, can I get in trouble by opening an email? Is there a risk associated with just opening the email? And it's actually not a clear-cut answer. There's kind of 2 parts to this. The first one is, by opening an email, you can be tracked. The person that sent you the email could potentially understand if you've opened that email, and they can use it as a way of understanding if that email address that they've sent something to is actually live, if there's someone at the end of it. The way they do that is by embedding a transparent image into the file, into the email. And so when you open up this email, it will connect back to the server where this image is located, and that's how they can track who's opened that email. They can put a tracking code in there and they can track that. So that's the first part, is, you know, the danger of opening an email. Well, they can track you, they can see what you're doing. The second part to that is, can you be exploited? And the answer to that is, it depends. It used to be a clear yes. You used to be able to get exploited using a few different types of attacks that would be able to exploit you if you open that email. That really doesn't exist these days. It's not a prevalent attack, it's not likely to be something that you need to worry about. So my opinion and my view is, don't worry necessarily about that side of things. Open emails, understand the risks. It's not necessarily an issue. The one thing I will say there is, even though they can track you, you need to weigh out that risk for yourself. It's pretty, even marketing emails, etc., can track you. It's a pretty common way of doing things. So then you open up the email, and what have you got inside? There's actually a few different areas. There's attachments, clearly. There's links, and then there's, what is it trying to get you to do? Does it want you to reply to the email? Send information, that sort of thing. So from an attachments point of view, and from a links point of view, they can be quite devastating in terms of what can happen if you open a link or if you open an attachment. And not only can it be devastating, it can happen immediately without you knowing that something's happened. So here are some examples. If you open up an attachment, you can have malware installed onto your machine. And actually, Gavin's going to talk more about that in his part of the presentation. That malware, when it's on your machine, you will have no idea most of the time. It can see everything you can do. It can access your email accounts. It can monitor all of your clicks. It can see what you're typing into your banking sites. It can then use that as a pivot point and propagate within your environment, your network. And again, you won't know it's there. And from that little foothold, they can start to pull information out of your organization, all of your company secrets, that sort of thing. The other part is ransomware, and I'm going to assume every single one of you know what ransomware is, in that it is locking up your environment, locking up your files, your key sensitive information, and stopping you from getting access to them. The only way you can reverse from that really is, one, around backups, having really good solid backups that you've tested and that you know that will work, or paying a ransom. And paying that ransom, it could be a few $100s, or it could be a few $1 million, depending on who you are and what they feel like at the time. Either way, if you get ransomware, it's going to lock things up to a point where you're going to lose access probably for multiple days to whatever it is. In some instances, there's instances out there, such as Toll Group, who have lost access to certain parts of their environment for months on end. It's a devastating attack, and it's one that's growing in prevalence every single day. So the third part is what happens if you reply to an email. Replying to an email has, going back to the clicking, there's one additional thing there that you should be aware of. Stealing credentials. This is actually also starting to rise in prevalence due to BEC attacks, etc. They send you an email, you click on that email, it takes you to something that looks like Microsoft as an example. You type in your credentials, turns out it's not Microsoft, it's an attacker-controlled location. They steal your credentials. They will then log back into your environment, into your email account, whatever it is, and they can have access. And there's some very simple things you can do to mitigate that. I'm hoping you've got them in place. I'll cover them a little bit later. And then the last part was around replying to emails and what sort of attack vectors there are around that. Let's move into the next section and I'll cover that off there. Okay, so specifically around business email compromise. So business email compromise is really around the scammer, the attacker, impersonating someone or something, a trusted company, a trusted entity, an executive, etc. And they're just trying to scam you or to get information from you. And this doesn't have to be across email. I'm sure pretty much everyone on this call now has seen an SMS that is fraudulent, a phishing email, and they're trying to get you to do similar things to what I'm just about to cover off here. So how does business email compromise, BEC, how does it present itself? There is a number of different attack vectors that they can use. The first one that we're going to cover off is what I just mentioned before around account compromise. So you receive an email like this. In this case, they're saying that there's been unusual activity within your email account. If you're using Microsoft 0365 or the latter, this is not necessarily an uncommon thing to see, except in this instance, it's fraudulent. You click on that review recent activity, it takes you to a website that looks like Microsoft. If you put in your credentials, they're instantly stolen and can be used by the scammer to log back in and have access to your account. So what are they going to do with that access? Often, the first thing they'll do is set up forwarding rules that say, every single email that comes into this account or leaves this account, forward it to an external account somewhere. That external account is then controlled by the attacker, and it means that they can be logging in and seeing everything that you're seeing in your emails without actually having to be on your systems at all. It also means that if you change your password, etc., they've still got access to everything there. So what do they do with that information is they start to profile you. So most of these emails are going to go to people that, executives or people with power in the organization, people such as payroll, etc., people that might have company secrets. Those sort of people are often going to get this type of email. And they're going to profile you. They're going to look at how you talk, what you talk about, how you sign off on things, what makes you you. And then they're going to use that information to do what you're going to see later on in terms of scamming people. Another example of that exact one here is around, you've got quarantine messages, etc. If you click on that, the link that will be in that email, then it's going to be the same sort of attack vector. I'm sure you've seen many of this type of thing before. Now, there's another attack vector here around fake billing. And this fake billing can take multiple forms. In this instance, it's sending you an email that looks like it's for energy AGL. What they will do though is where you pay that bill to will not be the typical AGL, or it could be that that attachment there, that zip file, is actually malicious and they're going to get information from you. Going back to the previous example, if they've got access to your environment and you are sending out emails to certain locations where you want to, you're sending out invoices, it's not uncommon for the attacker who is on your machine to send them another email or change the details of your email to say, and in fact, here's a really good example that we saw live. We were at an organization and they received an email saying, hey, here is the new international bank account details that we need you to pay this overdue invoice into. And this particular invoice was $1 million, just over, and they paid that because they don't have the right systems and processes in place, part of what you're going to learn about later on in this as well, to be able to protect themselves from this type of attack. So it's very important to actually put those checks and balances in place. The last one I'm going to show you here is around the CEO fraud, which is, and this is actually one that Laura from our marketing team received, looking like it's coming from me. There's some telltale signs in here, the domain isn't correct, etc. But what are they trying to do here? So in this instance, can you go on an errand for me urgently? What they're likely to be doing here is trying to get you to buy gift cards. And they will take these gift cards that when, if Laura was to go and get these gift cards, they'd bring them back, she'd scratch off the code and she would send them their code, and then instantly, they got $500 worth of gift cards or the like. That's one attack vector for this, but another very common one is, again, they're profiling you. They can watch the CEO, and not so much now when people aren't traveling, but it was very common for them to wait for you to hop into wait for someone to be going on a business trip, the CEO to be going on a business trip. The second they hop on that plane, they send an email to one of the staff saying, hey, the plane's been delayed. I've just had this email. We desperately need you to send us the company list ASAP because I don't have full access to the systems from here. Those sort of things, or pay this bill urgently. They know that you can't check with the CEO because he's on a plane or she's out on a plane. They're uncontactable, and so they can be very sophisticated in the way that they do this type of thing. Okay. So now we've got a pretty solid understanding of what can happen when you open or click or execute on one of these phishing emails and the impact it can have. What can you actually do to protect yourself from this? I mentioned before I was going to talk about 2 specific things that you could do that are very important. So the first step is make sure that you've got your technology controls in place. It's something that every one of you should have. We'd expect you to have the basics: antivirus, firewalls, mail gateways, those sort of things. Most people have them in place. Backups are one that we find are lacking, especially in smaller businesses that don't necessarily have the same level of IT experience. Backups are critical for you to be able to recover from this type of attack. Even if you do have backups, a lot of people don't test them. So make sure that if you don't have them, get them set up straight away. And if you haven't tested them, test them straight away because they are critical. The second part is multi-factor authentication, specifically for your email, your Office 365, which is what a lot of people are using, or G Suite. And anything that's online, anything that's cloud-based should be using multi-factor authentication. This is not foolproof, but it will stop the majority of these types of attacks, these credential capture attacks, from being able to take hold and access your information. Second, and we've already touched on this a little bit, is around updating your policies, your procedures, the way that you do things internally. You need those checks and balances. Again, this is something that Gavin's going to be talking about later. How do you handle the money? How do you check? How do you make sure that the organization that you're talking to is the one that you think you're talking to? Do you have a policy that means that you call that person to make sure that when they've requested a change of bank details, that is correct? Does the policy tell you that you can't use the phone number that's in the email that's requesting it? You have to go through directly to the person, and because phone numbers can be fake too. And ultimately, it's really important to be baking in security from the start. Security is a state of mind. It's not just something that people have necessarily. A lot of people are trusting, and they don't understand that people out there are trying to take advantage of them. And it's something that comes with the next point, which is coming from training. People don't know what they don't know, and that's where training can really help. Things like we discussed before around the different types of phishing emails, etc. But then as a business owner or as an employee, how do you take advantage of training? Because training can be time consuming, it can be cumbersome, and that's where we say make sure that you fully automate it. Build a system or use a system that takes care of it for you. You set it up once, it takes a small amount of time, you press go, and it continues to run. In Australia, in New Zealand as well, make sure that it's specifically targeted at you guys, as Australian accents, with using zip codes, using not using zip codes, not using social security numbers, which we see a lot in terms of content, which tends to make the subject get rejected by the person that's doing it. And make sure you're following a good methodology. The methodology is actually really key to how you can get the most out of your training system. You don't want to be smashing people with half an hour's worth of content. If you're going to be sending out simulated phishing emails, which you absolutely should, make sure that they're not silly hard. People don't learn by getting really hard things. They need to learn by baby steps and building them up. And again, it needs to be automated, because if it's not automated, you're not going to do it. And so just on that one, part of today, after this session, we're actually going to be giving you a BEC awareness pack. This awareness pack, it's going to cover, it's going to contain a BEC awareness guide, as well as 5 handy tips to avoid scams booklet that you'll be able to send out and give to people in your environment, in your employees, to really help them to start that journey. So then What about response? What happens when you actually get done? You've gone and put in all of the key things. You've got your technical controls in place, you've got your systems, your policies, you've got your training in place, but still a phishing email can get through. I mean, it's possible, absolutely. The way that security works is you build layers. None of them are foolproof. Eventually something is likely to get through and you have to make that assumption. So what do you do when that happens? Do you have anything, do you have an understanding of how you're going to deal with your incident response? Do you know who to call, who you're going to report phishing emails to? As an example, on our CyberCX website, there's a free emergency, I think it's a 1-800 number there for if you have an incident, you can call them, you know, but do you have that recorded? Do people know who to call? Who in the organization know this information? And again, make sure you've got your backups tested and ready to go at all times. And then the last part really is around the pre-execution. So what happens, what are those checks and balances? If you're just about to execute on one of these phishing emails, what is in place to protect you? And that's really where eftsure come into play. And I think it's the perfect time actually to, rather than me delve into this, to hand over to Gavin, and he can really help you along that part of the journey.
Thank you very much, Damien. That was great. I'm just going to share my screen, and we will head away. And here we go. So just as Damien said, Damien has spoken about how to stop these threats coming in, and it's a first line of defense. But in some cases, you need another line of defense because these threats, these phishing emails, these compromised scams do sometimes get through. I think the umbrella term for a lot of these scams is social engineering, and I guess the engineering bit is a little dose of technology, and the social, it stands for a big dose of psychology. And because the manipulation is often psychological and around impersonation, it is very hard to pick up. And I think from the commercial end, because if Phriendly Phishing help you prevent the threats from your people from getting duped, where we come in is if they do happen to get duped, we prevent the threats from hitting your bank account, from creating any kind of financial loss and any tertiary losses to that. So I'm just going to back up a little before I get into that example that Damien mentioned around Levitas Capital, and Nick mentioned, and just back up around commercially what's driving. When I say the problem for payments, what we mean is the risk to your bank account. And it really starts here, which is unfortunately, and this is inherent in the infrastructure of the Australian banking system, it doesn't match names to numbers. That's not a problem unique to Australia. It's largely a global problem, where the core infrastructure of the banking system was inherited from a pre-digital era where we'd have cashiers actually eyeballing checks. We'd write out checks and eyeball them, and had a more manual mechanism to check. That system's partly adapted to a digital world, but not entirely. And as a result, the banks do not match payee names to BSB account numbers, and in fact will go as far to disclaim liability on their websites. And I've just picked these three, but you could pretty much find any bank, and they will disclaim liability saying if you hit pay, if you hit confirm, if you hit authorize, you're authorizing the payment, and the liability for a loss due to an incorrect checking of BSB account number to name, that liability sits with you. So that's part of the problem from the commercial end. And then we have some of these other drivers that Damien touched on really well, which is a digitally connected supply chain, pervasive use of email to do business, and email being a largely vulnerable technology platform. Lots of studies, research into the vulnerability of email by various businesses, easy to find online. And then I think the ease that a digitally connected world affords someone wanting to steal identity. You know, it's one thing, you could steal someone's identity on an individual basis, but then you could actually steal the business identity of another business. This often exists in text form today, soon to encroach on voice. And for those of you that were alarmed by, I don't know if anyone saw that deep fake video impersonation of Tom Cruise that did the rounds. I'm sure whether it's Phriendly Phishing or ourselves, we could happily share that. I just call it the Tom Cruise example, where someone has used deep fake technology to impersonate visually Tom Cruise. It is absolutely identical. And with all those technologies, which will keep evolving, it's really easy to impersonate another business, never mind just on email. So all of those factors then run into, I guess, a fifth factor driving this kind of payment fraud pandemic, which is in most companies, their financial controls are somewhat manual. Now, yes, people have invested in ERP. Yes, people have invested in frontline defense. Yes, all of you are on this, and kudos to you for being on, engaging in our webinar today, and there are others. But somewhere, and even in some of the biggest, most sophisticated companies we work with, somewhere you will find a point of manual control. Somewhere you will find a point where Sally is checking up on Bob, or John is checking Sheila's work, and we understand the sort of accounting best practice tenet of segregation of duties, but it's often segregating human duties. And I'm afraid humans as a checking mechanism or manual controls alone, in the face of these cyber fraudsters who are no longer teenagers in garages sort of trying to be ideological and make a point. They're actually well-organized adversaries operating in very organized, intentional manner from all over the world, educated, equipped, resourced, have the same access to technology that we do. They employ all of that skill, ability, experience, and intent, and target your business. What we say in the face of that, people checking people, is really like taking a knife to a gunfight. And we know companies have embraced increased control. We know auditors are asking it of you. But I'd just like you to consider for a moment that the vendor callback controls you might have in place are gapped. Where are your AP teams or your control people taking the phone numbers from? Where are they sourcing that information? How are they, are they leading the witness, so to speak, when they reach out to vendors and source information from them? Are they ever relying on voicemails? How are they dealing with shared office spaces? All of those things, callback controls need to be done in a perfect expert way to be effective. And then vendor management systems, and Damien touched on this. Obviously, they've improved workflow, efficiency, and to a degree control, but they're not impermeable. A piece of malware or Trojan that comes in via an email or an innocent click, as I'll show you in a few moments, that can compromise a vendor management system. And then a fraudster is at the high table. If they're into your ERP or your vendor management system, it's a buffet of fraud opportunities. As Nick said up front, we just don't know who we're paying. And then along has come not so much COVID, although that's very front of mind for many of us again, unfortunately at the moment, but work from home is the issue. Because even once the healthcare pandemic has passed, hybrid working for many companies is here to stay. And if we're at home, and Damien said this in his first sentence, if we're remote, if we're at home, well, then financial controls are harder to implement. IT controls are harder to implement. Cultural standards, cultural and educational standards are all a little bit harder to implement. Awareness to risk. So all of that amplifies the risk. As one CFO said to us from a large company, he actually said this in the first round of COVID last year, but he said, I just paid $1 million for my kitchen table. And he went on to say how unnerving that was. So all of that is just reinforcing, I guess, from the commercial payments end, the drivers of these risks, these business email compromise, social engineering risks and scams. To illustrate it, I want to spend just a few moments on and step you through this rather tragic story that was well covered in the media in November last year. I've picked the Fin Review article, but it was covered in most media platforms, where ultimately a click once, one click on one Zoom malicious invite, an innocent mistake that any of us could have made, led to a sequence of events that ultimately led to the collapse of a fast-growing and really robust hedge fund, Levitas Capital. In the picture there, you can see two of the principals of Levitas Capital, I guess the chief fund managers or the chief investment officers of Levitas Capital, Michael Brooks and Michael Fagan. And what I'm going to do just over the next few minutes is step you through exactly what happened, as best as we can determine it based on what was published. So there might be some assumptions which I'll flag to you and some gaps in my sort of unpacking of this, but this is based on the public available knowledge. So let me start by introducing the players. You have a Levitas Capital, who is this fast-growing hedge fund based in Sydney, and you have a fraudster. I'll just reiterate, a fraudster is no longer or less likely to be a mendacious teenager in a garage trying to prove a point in the mode that we often used to see in the 90s kind of hacker movies. Fraudsters are organized syndicates. They often come together to purport frauds and then disband. There are frauds all over the world. They practice from all over the world. People often cite Eastern Europe or China, but Peter Price, the chairman of Crime Stoppers, said to me a few days ago that the largest exporter of cybercrime is still the United States. So don't know if that's qualified, but it's coming from all over the world. And what we know is Australia, despite having smaller economies than the UK and the US, is a highly targeted country. So we are under threat. So on that side, you've got the target, Levitas Capital, and the fraudster. In this case, there's some other players, and this speaks to the research the fraudster would have done and the sophistication of the scam. The fraudster would have known that Levitas Capital, that their money is held by trustees, being in this case AET Corporate Trust, a well-known trustee organization in Australia, and then a fund administrator, Apex. As I stepped through this scam, it was not clear on the role or any missteps on the side of Apex. I can't comment on that. What appeared to be, it appeared to largely be in Levitas in relation to AET Corporate Trust. But my point here is the fraudster understood how hedge funds operate from a regulatory and an operational context, knowing that the trustees were needed to be targeted in the scam. On the other side of the equation, the fraudster had to set up some businesses for the purposes of fraud. Unique Star Trading Sydney, Pavelin Limited in Hong Kong, and there was a third entity I'll talk about later on. So the fraudster sets up these companies with the purposes of committing a fraud, and these are now the players. Let's step through the scam now that the chessboard has been set. So the first thing the fraudster did was send a fake or malicious Zoom invite to Levitas Capital. This is step one. Now, to Damien's point earlier on, they could have sent this out broadly, like it could have been just a mass phishing kind of attack, seeing who would bite, or our feeling here was it was an example of what is sometimes termed spear phishing, where they specifically targeted Levitas. And they send this fake Zoom invite, fake's a weird word, but this malicious Zoom invite into Levitas Capital. It might have looked like this, it might not have. This is just a notional example I found. It is a real example of a phishing Zoom invite. Whether this was the exact one used on Levitas, I cannot say. But again, using all the cues we know and trust, using a known brand, Zoom in this case, especially during the COVID year where Zoom became pervasive in our way of doing business. And they send that in. And at some point, Michael Fagan unfortunately clicks on it. And what's been reported is, or discovered forensically, is when he clicks, it appears he inserts malware into his system. And as Damien said, once malware is in your system, this malicious software, well, it can propagate, it can monitor, it can analyze, it can search, it can put in filters. But they're basically in his email system. They might have been in further systems, but what we know is the fraudsters now were monitoring, tracking, observing, filtering Michael Fagan's emails. Okay. And he clicks. Then what happens is the next part of the scam, step 3, after he clicks, what they do is they take this fraudulent company that they've set up for the purposes of the fraud, and they issue not quite an invoice. They issue what is reported to be a capital call. They know Levitas is an investor making investments, maybe at an appropriate time in the investment life cycle towards the back end of last year. And they issue a capital call document, kind of like an invoice, to the trustee. Now they know the trustee in order to pay this capital call invoice, needs the approval of Michael Fagan. And that's what I meant earlier on when I said they'd really researched the dynamics and the relational dynamics of this trust. So they issue this capital call for $1.2 million, obviously framing Unique Star Trading as an investee company of Levitas Capital. Now in the email system, the fraudster can move to the next phrase. They know that AET Corporate Trust is going to get approval from Fagan, and they can impersonate him. At this point, I just want to pause and raise some questions about vendor management. How did Unique Star Trading get into the vendor master file of AET Corporate Trust or Levitas Capital or both? You know, these questions remain unanswered, but it does go to the point, which is I'm sure both the trustees and Levitas and possibly the fund administrator, I'm sure they all had good AP people. I'm sure they did have some form of controls in place, but not good enough, which goes to my previous point. But just back to the scam, they send this capital call invoice to AET Corporate Trust, at which point AET Corporate Trust phone Fagan to get his authorization to pay the 1.2 million. Now, we don't know exactly what happened, but what I can say is we've seen frauds where the fraudsters will port a phone number. So even if AET Corporate Trust go for approval, or in the case of a standard supplier, do a vendor callback control, the phone call's actually going to the fraudster, unbeknownst to the payee. But nevertheless, they try contact Fagan. Apparently he's at gym. He might have emailed back. So he's at gym. He gets a voicemail from them saying, should we pay this $1.2 million to Unique Star Trading? Please approve. Fagan possibly emails back. He doesn't call back. He emails back, according to the reports, he emails back to say, don't pay. I don't authorize this payment. But as both Damien and I mentioned now earlier, the fraudsters were already in his email, monitoring his email, filtering his emails from the malware, and they could block his response email. So AET Corporate Trust never get the email saying don't pay. Fagan will similarly not receive any further communication as AET Corporate Trust. What in fact happens is the fraudsters, there's the filters, the fraudsters double down and they email AET Corporate Trust and they say, impersonating Michael Fagan from Michael Fagan's real email address. That's an important point. It's not some quasi address, it's his real authentic email account responding to AET Corporate Trust saying, please pay, I authorize the payment, and they transfer $1.2 million to this company, Unique Star Trading, to a bank account in Sydney. What promptly happens is someone at, one fraudster at Unique Star Trading moves the money to 3 or 4 different ANZ branches in Queensland and actually goes and withdraws that money in cash, books a plane ticket and leaves the country with close to $800,000 in cash. So that's how that happens. Turns out that over the same period, using probably similar dynamics, AET Corporate Trust were manipulated, probably by the fraudsters, repeating the impersonation of the principal Michael Fagan to make 2 more payments. A payment to Pavilion Limited in Hong Kong for $2.5 million and a second payment to a third company, East Grand Trading in Singapore. Okay, and here's the tragedy. The tragedy is not just that the money was lost. It turns out they recovered, I think, 1.2 of that $8 million. So one of the transactions they managed to pause, but $1 million in cash was lost. And Australian Catholic Super that had committed $16 million as an investor in Levitas Capital were obviously worried and disturbed by this, this problem, this control problem in the fund, and they held back their $16 million investment, and it led to, at the time it was reported a collapse of the fund. I need to check what's happened to that business today, but at that time it was reported as a collapse. So that's how that happens. And just to go back, that's more about, yes, there's some malware and some technology in play, but it's really about impersonating a party to another party and manipulating them psychologically into paying. So the question is what to do about it. And if you're asking the question what to do about it, well, then you need to answer it with this. It's a question of identity. You need to solve for identity. And just to underline my point one more time, it's not a lot about you and your system. It's not even about your staff. It's understanding the full identity of your supplier and business partner ecosystem. And the challenge from a protecting your bank account point of view is, how do we create a perimeter of defense around an ecosystem of suppliers? One form of defense is everything Damien spoke about. Have your teams educated, do sessions like this, understand what to look out for, put two-factor authentication in place on your systems. All of that matters. But our job at eftsure is, if those measures fail, and they can fail with your best effort and intent, how do we prevent it from hitting your bank account? How do we stop you from paying the wrong people? And what I'm going to do just for the last 4 or 5 minutes of this presentation, then we'll go to questions and answers, is talk about conceptually how we've solved that at eftsure. I'm not going to go into our product in details, but I'm going to talk about the I guess the big paradigm we've employed to try solve this problem of identity, and we call it collaborative cybersecurity. And those aren't often words you put together, or you could replace that with collaborative payment controls. And again, those terms don't often sit comfortably together. We say collaborative because what we've done is bring the power of the community together to create a piece of technology that stops those scams from hitting your bank account. In much the same way that TripAdvisor uses the power of the community and the crowd to give you a better verification on a good restaurant to go eat at or a good hotel to go stay at, or similarly how Google Maps uses multi-factor data points, it uses multiple data points to tell you the best route home, we've embraced the same approach to verify the legitimacy of people you're going to pay. And I'll explain how we've done that. We started with one company, and we went about verifying all the suppliers of that company. To be honest, our first company was, I think it was Nick Scarley, or it was Strand Bags. It wasn't Monash Health, but I've just picked Monash Health, one of our great customers, as a notional number one. And we used two methods to verify all of Monash Health's suppliers. The first was BankLink, which is some proprietary software we have, which is, I guess, a pre-open banking version of open banking, where a supplier can log into they can log into their bank account through our portal, and we'll extract their key bank account information. And then we also have a team of experts who in the early days would go manually verify suppliers using phone calls. And we went about and we verified a company, in this case Monash Health's vendors. We then did another healthcare company, Alfred Health. We then went vertical by vertical, okay? And this isn't quite the order we did it in, but it explains the construction of our system. We went construction, we went retail, we've done schools, we've done state government, and so on. And we went about verifying all these businesses' vendors. What happens over time, though, is once you've verified a supplier set of one company, that same supplier set provide services to another company. So by verifying one business's suppliers and vendor set, you've already verified the next, and you start getting an economy of scale. More importantly, you can actually start cross-matching data, which brings in our most prevalent and powerful form of vendor verification, which is cross-matching. I'll unpack that in a bit more detail. But if you knit this all together in a database, you create the ability to do that. So let's take a closer look. Let's say Langer O'Rourke and Meriton are both paying Caterpillar Moving Equipment or Coates Hire or Mars Cranes at a given set of bank account details, and we verified those details are correct, first for Langer O'Rourke, then for Meriton. Well, the chances if multiple of our customers are paying Coates Hire at those same BSB account number and account name details, that the chances are more likely that they're correct, okay? And we issue to our customers a symbol to certify that, and we call it a green thumb, okay? Let's say there are two interesting points to make. Let's say BuildCorp, another one of our customers, joins our community. They join our community of businesses. Two things happen. The first thing is, as I mentioned earlier, we've already verified 70–80% of BuildCorp's suppliers. But the second thing that happens is if they're also paying Coates Hire at the same set of bank account details, the same BSB account name, account number, and trading name details that we've matched up, Well, the strength of our verification has gone up by 1. Now, I'm speaking in 2 dimensions, but this actually exists. A company like Coates Hire could have been verified many times by our customers. Now let's loop all the way back to the beginning, to what Damien and I were talking about earlier on, a business email compromise. Let's say with your best intent, something gets through your team. Yes, they've been educated. Yes, they're more aware of these scams, but somehow something's got through your payment controls. The reason why this method can pick it up, whereas another one can't, is let's say Coates Hire is compromised and the fraudsters issue a malicious email to Meriton and it gets through their controls. We can pick that up because Meriton will attempt to pay Coates Hire at a different set of details to everyone else in our database. It doesn't cross-match, and we can issue a red thumb. Where do we issue these green and red thumbs? Well, in your online banking, live, instantly, in real time, and we can employ that database to also issue some other symbols. We can use the same power and mass of that database to alert you to lapses in tax registration, lapses in business registration, breaches of predetermined payment thresholds, and there are various other alerts we can provide you. We provide those in your online banking, no matter who you bank with. But for many big organizations, they don't want to check in online banking. They want to review payment files, which you can do in our portal. And that's just conceptually how our system works to prevent BEC from resulting in incorrect payments. Now, obviously, for that to work, that database needs to be big. It is. We have 2.1 million businesses verified in that database. That's about 80% of all businesses in the Australian economy by active ABNs, and we're monitoring about $4.5 billion of payments a month. And then there are various other things which I won't go into because I'm going to rob our Q&A time. But you can also use that database we can cleanse your vendor master data in one or two clicks. We can give you a review on your vendor master data and so on. And we've been very lucky to have a whole lot of leading businesses choose to work with us. So that's collaborative cybersecurity. I think what you've heard today is two important parts of the equation, which is how to prevent your business from being manipulated and duped, and then a first line of defense, and then eftsure as another line of defense. If stuff does get through, how do you protect it from hitting your bank account? And as Damien said earlier, Phriendly Phishing, because you've attended this webinar, which we're very happy about, they'll offer a free BEC and phishing employee awareness toolkit. And what we'd like to offer to eftsure is, during COVID, we launched a free trial service, largely targeted at small businesses to help them through COVID. But at that URL, which Nick can always publish to you in a follow-up email, we do have a free trial service. We've sort of kept it open into this year, and you can check up on a few vendors. It accesses our full database. It doesn't have full functionality, and the use is limited, but that's something we can offer you to give you a sense of what we're doing. And with that, and sorry, I've eaten a bit of the Q&A time, but with that, I'll hand back to Nick, who can take on your questions and direct them to me or Damien. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Gav and Damien, thank you very much for those presentations. So if you have any questions, you can add them in the question tab, and we'll work through them. So the first one is for Damien, and it's from Anthony. And he asked, does using an email checker to review received emails and deleting them prior to download them to your computer help prevent BEC, or can they still track you?
It depends. It depends on what you're using to test it, and it depends on if it's going to load the images. So a lot of email clients these days don't load images by default. We saw that G Suite started loading them again. I believe that they've actually disabled that, but by and large, if it's not loading the images, you don't necessarily have to be worried about being tracked.
Yeah. So if there's any other questions, please put them in the question tab. Let me see. Question from Duncan. So I think this one is for Gavin. So in the example provided, if Apex Company has the same name on the bank account as Apex Company, will it be matched in your system? So I think that's the question around the BSB and the ABN being correct for Apex, whether our system would have picked it up.
I'm not sure if I'm answering the question accurately, but what I will say is we do a three-way match. We match BSB account number to payee name, but also to the ABR data. So we match it a third way also to the trading name data and the ABN. And then the system also has quite a lot of algorithmic, I guess, operations across the top of the database to make sure people can't game the database by setting up a company. In the case here, setting up a company very recently and only supplying sort of one company, only issuing invoices to one company. I don't know if I've answered your question. If I haven't, please reissue it. But we will root out any kind of duplication because we do a third-way match to the ABN, and then the algorithm picks up, like, it looks for recency and it looks for volume and frequency of payment to game that out. I'm not sure if I've answered your question. Can happily take it by email afterwards.
Yeah, I think that answered Duncan's question. And then I got another question for Damien from Spiro, if I pronounced that correctly. How helpful is antivirus software firewalls in preventing hacking from phishing, clicking links or attachments in emails?
Yeah, so I mentioned before, I come from a ethical hacking background, and my opinion is that any day of the week we can get past anything that's there to protect, by and large. You know, we still at CyberCX we have the tremendous team of ethical hackers doing exactly that. So, can you bypass antivirus? Absolutely. Our team can do that today. It's not an issue. Can you bypass the firewalls? Yes, absolutely. But as I said in my part of the presentation before, security is about layers. If you don't have them, you're going to get a lot more attacks and a lot more things that are going to get passed, you know, that will execute on your device that you wouldn't get if you had them. You want your antivirus to identify the low-hanging fruit. You want your mail gateways to block out the common issues. You know, and that's basically the way it filters down. You put multiple layers in place, and ultimately you're really hoping, and you know, strategically hoping that you're not going to have something get all the way down to the bottom and not get executed.
If I can just add to what Damien said, what we've observed in our end is, and fraudsters move. So they move towards the vulnerabilities. So if you have X in place, they'll try and move to Y. These organizations are so intentional and so committed. So exactly what Damien said, you've got to have layers. And I think for these scams we've discussed today, awareness, culture, education is certainly as important as the kind of infrastructure you can put in place, whether it's virus software or even eftsure. You know, you've got to have both. Now, obviously, there's a cost benefit to be done, but I would say in most cases the cost benefit works out where it's worth having these investments.
Yeah, I mean, just to further on that, I know that they can be bypassed, and I would never set up a business without them.
Exactly. Yeah, good point.
And then another question from Eli. If a company is scammed into paying a fraudster, can the bank get the money back?
I'll answer that. The bank has no legal liability to give you the money back. Okay, the liability sits with you. Now, in some cases, the bank will try remediate customers, depending on the value of the customer to the bank, depending on whether they can actually get the money. What often happens is it moves to mule accounts very quickly, and then as we saw in the example I gave, it gets withdrawn from banks very quickly into cash and then moved. And sometimes the mule account, they'll find people who don't even realize they're participating in a fraud. They're paid just for their bank account to be moved. to be used. So it moves around quickly and then is withdrawn. Sometimes the banks can't stop it. The other thing I want to flag is there's a lot of talk in the media about, you know, the evolution of the banking system, be it open banking, new payments platform. All those initiatives speed up transaction processing, and real-time movement of funds means it's going to be even harder for the banks to stop, you know, to stop these things. So short answer, sometimes the banks remediate, often they don't. Depends on a few factors. One study I can quickly quote by KPMG, a global banking study, it's actually 2019 now, so it is a bit outdated. That study said across 13 large banks in Asia Pacific, only half the respondents, sorry, only half of the people who were scammed and participated in the study, only half of them only got a quarter back, if that makes sense. So in some instances, yes, assume not.
And then a question from John, and I think this is for Damien. My business uses a broker in the US. The biggest risk is someone being able to log into the broker account and withdraw in the funds. How do I counter this? And how good is my soft defender security system?
So the broker account part of this question, I think there's two things that you should do. First one is two-factor authentication. Two-factor authentication is easy these days. You can have it on your mobile, you know, Google Authenticator as an example. Very easy to set up. A broker account should support it. The other one is make sure that with the broker you set up an account, a dedicated bank account that they will not send money, allow money to be withdrawn to go to any other account. That should also be an option. So I'd be setting it up in that way. So that way it's very, very difficult for someone to come in and get the bank account changed and have it transferred to them. I missed the last part of the question.
So I think it's how good is Microsoft Defender security system?
It's been a while since I've looked into how they rank, but Microsoft Defender, last time I looked, was actually ranking significantly well. Like, it was doing a very good job. It's free, it's easy. It was doing a lot of what you would expect from an antivirus platform. I would not recommend it.
And then another question from Candice for Damien, and this is quite an interesting question actually, is if the weakest link is human error, how does training prevent employees from clicking a link and providing credentials, and how much training is actually enough?
You know, again, going back to my layered security example, we don't sell training as being a silver bullet. It's not going to fix everyone. It's definitely not something that happens overnight. Phishing is actually a really hard and technical thing for most people to learn, because it's, you know, most people aren't technical. They don't get it. You show someone a URL underneath the link and it's mind-blowingly difficult for a lot of people. That's why we've taken the approach of building people up with baby steps. We allow them to learn and practice with easy examples, and then slowly build that up over time to be more complex. You know, it's the way that we learn anything. All learning is done in baby steps. You know, if you're learning a new language, you don't become an expert overnight. You know, it needs to take time. So I can't even quantify how much training is enough. It depends on the individual. It depends on the culture of the organization. There's a large amount of different variables in play. We're never going to stop everyone from clicking, and that's why you have your technical controls and your human controls and your incident response, you know, and your eftsure capability, etc. It's the only way to provide a relatively secure environment is with layers. There's no silver bullet at any part in that stack.
Yeah, and then so I think this will be the last question because we're a few minutes over time as well. And this one is for Gavin. Have you ever had any instance of a transfer to a fraudulent account despite having eftsure?
No. Anyone who's been using our system and that's across hundreds of customers now, millions of transactions, several years. We haven't had anyone using the system make the wrong payment. I'm very proud of that. So proud of that. Have there been businesses that have been waiting to implement and not implemented the system and done that? Sure. Not many, but a few. But once the system's in place, we haven't had an error. I think it's business critical for us. What we do say is no security system or consulting or can make you 100% secure. And I'd always be very cautious of any vendor offering 100% security. We level you up. I imagine Damien would agree with that. But yeah, we have it is our core business offer. So no, none of our customers have had that happen.
Okay. I think that concludes this for today.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. We'll be sending the recordings to you later tomorrow, including some resources that were promised during the webinar. So yeah, look out for that email.
Thank you.
And we'll stay in touch. Thank you, Damien. Thank you, Gavin.
Thanks, Nick.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate your time.
Me too. Thank you.